In the previous video, I mentioned that. So I initially mistook this part. I thought it was for enemy's HP loss and not her own HP. Then a player asked how I interpreted it as is and mentioned that it makes no sense if the first skill is based on her HP and the second one is based on enemy's HP, SMH, referring to Maisie S3 description, which I personally agree, but sometimes a character is just unique. To make it clear, like I mentioned in the beginning, at first I also thought that it was based on the enemy's lost HP and not her own HP. So how did I end up changing my interpretation for Maisie S3? You see, usually they will describe the skill clearly. For example, Izuma with her own lost HP and Ivy with the enemy's lost HP. But there are some cases where the skill description is vague. Hokuto, Kurumi, and Maisie are some of the examples. Here you see that these three of them having a similar description for the lost HP part. Hokuto with percent lost HP didn't mention whether it is her own HP or if it is the enemy's. Kurumi and Maisie with percent HP lost. Again, it is vague as it didn't mention whether it is their own HP or the enemy's. And to me, the answer leans towards the former, where it is based on their own lost HP. This is becoming the new base of my interpretation for Maisie S3, as it remains true for Hokuto and Kurumi's cases where their damage scales more with the more HP that they have lost. And since in the previous video I mentioned that the way to use Maisie is by using S2 first then S3, I didn't get the chance to see the difference of her S3 damage between using her S2 first then her S3 and only using her S3. But thanks to the player that pointed out about this issue to me, it makes me curious to see if it is just a translation error from the game side or not for Maisie. Because if it is really just a translation error, as they didn't make it clear enough for Maisie's S3 part, meaning Maisie S3 will work the same way as how I initially thought of it, which increases her overall performance rating. So let's test that out. Despite the same HP loss description as Kurumi's, it turned out that it was a translation error for Maisie, which is good news. With this issue getting cleared up, the overall performance rating for Maisie is back to how I first initially thought of her. Her S3 won't be a bummer in raid, and yeah, the way to use her is still the same like how I mentioned it in the previous video. S2 first, wishing the enemy's HP drop below 50%, then use her S3.